the world. Okay, it's not just in China. It's in Japan. It's in Scotland and Ireland for the European market, and it's in the United States. Yes. Oh, is that right? And I have a thing up there, I think somewhere. Maybe I forgot to put it back in. They opened a big one in Vietnam in 2007, and the Shenzhen plant is shrinking. I will talk about labor difficulties in China later, but they've had labor problems. Those are the people jumping off and demonstrating. So, and it's getting more. And China's letting its wages go up, so they've gone to Vietnam with this new complex, which is growing while the one in Shenzhen is shrinking. Now they go to Brazil. Why would they go to Brazil? Brazilian market, Latin American market. Latin America is booming, so it makes a lot of things. It's still that locational logic. If you're doing the final assembly, you're creating a computer and you're going to ship it. It's better to be near the final market to save transportation costs and instabilities and so on. And tariff barriers. Absolutely. And that's because they're trying to protect some local industry. Brazil has a certain electronics. They've got an ambiguous. They've had efforts to try and really build up their own electronics. Hasn't worked out well. But yeah, there's Mercosur and there's tariff barriers. So distance and tariffs. Things we talked about before in our simple model. But they apply also to contract manufacturers. Okay, here's Flextronics back in 2000, located all over the world, including Brazil, by the way. I don't know what that one is. In the middle of the Amazon? That makes no sense. I think they mean it's actually in regional, yeah, it's got to be somewhere in Venezuela or Suriname or something. Yeah, but it is Suriname, yeah, that's right. But, even within these far-flung things, when they do their assembly, like this is an industrial park in Guadalajara, Flextronics. This is an older thing I grabbed off the web a few years ago. But it shows that when they do their assembly, they keep some things close by. A warehouse, a distribution center, okay. But look at their plastics. Because maybe the case that they're going to assemble everything in, they want to just snap one right there. So they'll do it themselves. So, this incredible complex geography where this stuff is done. And talking about globalizing industry now, offshoring has swept the U.S. and the EU over the last 20 years, mostly to Asia. The push of expenses at home and the pull of cheaper labor and more competent producers in Asia, and led by high tech. But I give some non-high tech examples here about coming back to the furniture district of Italy and how they've rescued themselves by offshoring a lot of production to China. North Carolina doing the same, importing much more of its components or even finished pieces to reduce. And that's this means of competing by reducing delivery time. But basically, a lot of companies, American car makers, and with the growth of India, a lot of car makers from around the world going to India for parts. Tech firms going to India for their operations. And it can be software, it can be, but a lot of it is hardware too. Most of the Indian stuff is software, actually. Now, which leads us to the forms of globalization. Now, the oldest form of globalization I talked about in Lecture 1, which was the outsourcing of resources, basically buying your resources from third world colonial countries. Buy your coffee, buy your copper, whatever it is. And that's a kind of globalization that's been around a long time. More recent is the globalization of manufacturing, which is mostly a post-World War II phenomenon of the growth of manufacturing in Latin America and then in Asia. And now coming on so strong that countries that were not industrialized before are industrializers. They are having their national industrial revolutions, which was Lecture 2. But today we're talking about a third kind of globalization of industry, which is the global production chain, where you're buying parts or assemblies, manufactured products from manufacturing countries, from these newly industrializing countries, which do it cheaper and better. And when you look at trade figures in the globe, you get these glowing figures of the growth of trade, you actually can't figure out which one you're talking about. Like some of the biggest trade items are things like coal and oil, which are boring resources and energy sources, right? Very important in the world market today. Some of them are final products coming from around the world because China now makes makes steel, which is a final product for the Bay Bridge. It does it cheaper and better than you can buy it here, so you buy it from them. Turns out the cost difference is marginal, so probably it's a kind of dubious thing. But everybody got on this bandwagon at one point, thinking that China steel must be cheaper. It's very marginally cheaper, actually, it turns out today. So global trade growth has actually been outrunning global GDP growth because all this stuff is going around. From the new manufacturing countries, the parts, they're flying around the world. Trade is growing more rapidly than output. But you can't, under trade figures, you can't sort out the three different kinds of globalization of industry. There's also, coming to offshoring again. Offshoring means moving existing production offshore. And one kind, again, is buying resources. You used to get your copper from Arizona, now you get it from Chile. Or you move your manufacturing abroad. GM, Ford used to build cars in the U.S. It has car assembly plants in Mexico now. That's a kind of offshoring. Or you buy from foreign sources, other companies, a component, a battery that you used to make in Ohio, and now you make, or an outboard motor part you used to make in Ohio, and now you make it in Vietnam. And there's two ways of organizing offshoring, and you can see the growth here of offshoring, with high-tech leading the way, again, the blue versus all manufacturing. That's 80s and 90s. But two ways of organizing offshoring. One is to do it within the firm. GM can make batteries in China under its own name, its own factories, and ship them back. Ford can make cars in Mexico and ship them back. And that's intra-firm offshoring. And then inter-firm offshoring is the kind of subcontracting we talked about before, the kind of contracting abroad. But surprisingly, over half of all the offshoring is intra-firm. It's American corporations moving abroad, producing stuff cheaper, and then shipping it back to the U.S. And offshoring and outsourcing get confused. Outsourcing simply means buying outside the firm. Offshoring means buying outside the country, in short. Yeah, offshoring means buying outside the country. Sourcing outside the country. Outsourcing means simply getting it outside the firm. It can be gotten from the same city. Okay, and in fact, in industrial districts do all kinds of outsourcing, but they do it within their district, within their cluster. So Silicon Valley both outsources within the industrial district of Silicon Valley and is a leader in offshoring a lot of its operations, a lot of its components and assemblies. Okay? Well, just to beat this to death, you can buy global natural resources around the world. That's the first form. You can buy from countries that are newly industrialized, who make a very good product and do it better, maybe with a better factory or cheaper labor or whatever it is. Or you can do this production chain stuff, which is the new form of globalization, which has been growing like crazy. And if you look at something like your PC, here's some guy, I got this at a conference, some guy, this is 10 years old now, but he literally took apart his PC and looked at the components to see where they came from and assembled this list, which is a worldwide list. This was a European guy with an Irish, I think it was assembled in Ireland, but it was a Hewlett-Packard, I think, or a Compaq, something like that. Final assembly in Ireland, main box in Ireland, but as you can see, from all over the world. Okay, let's get to distribution and transport. Now, these are not quite as, that production chain stuff is a little trickier, a little more important, and I'm going to start with distribution and transport, and I'm going to carry through next week. You're going to see what I'm going to talk about flows and logistics revolutions and so on. Let's start with distribution. Distribution is about making connections between places and sites, the transporting of these bits and pieces and goods, the storage, which is an important segment that we don't think about too much, and the overall management of distribution, which is called logistics now. Okay, so what is distribution? It's forging connections. Connections between factories and their inputs, between factory and factory, between factory and retailing, getting it to the sales floor, so Walmart and its relationship with its suppliers. That's all distribution. There are many terms for it. Trade is distribution, actually. When we say trade, we tend to mean between countries. But distribution is a larger term for the movement of goods and parts and so on between sites, between locations of production and ultimately sales. There are sometimes the geographers call this linkage. In Marxist economics, it's called circulation. In business, traditionally business history, it was called wholesaling, merchandising. And today, the hot word, which has only been around in a big way for about 10, 15 years, on the tip of everybody's tongue, is logistics. That's the sexy topic. And we'll come back to that. Why is it sexy? Because of all the stuff being shipped around the world, across the oceans, by air, by ship, by train. This is a huge, exciting field. It's been revolutionized, and we'll get to that. Okay, the linkages are made by moving goods, by storing and transferring goods, and the corollary of that is communication. You can't move all this stuff, manage all this stuff without communication. So transport and communication, in a business sense, go together. Okay, distribution is huge. We tend to ignore it. Wholesaling is an unsexy field. Most people don't really pay any attention to it, but it's 21% of GDP in China still. 16% in India, 11% in the EU, and 8% in the USA. These are figures from the mid-2000s. Now, what's interesting is how much smaller the US is than the EU or India. That's because our distribution is more efficient. So it costs less. So it's a smaller part of the overall GDP. It's something we lead in, actually. The problem is we often lead in it in order to import Chinese products to our Walmarts. But that's only part of the story. So here's comparative employment, 2004, manufacturing, wholesaling, and retailing. We'll come back to retailing, of course, next week. Are pretty even, with wholesale being only maybe 2/3 the size of manufacturing in 2004. However, manufacturing's been falling, and wholesaling's been actually rising. So distribution has a really key role in economic geography, and progress in distribution is central to the whole dynamic of industrial progress I talked about with technological change, industrialization of the world, yada, yada, yada. So this is a part of the whole ongoing industrial revolution that's been produced by capitalism and the market over the last 200 years. Okay, transport. Just a brief intro. We'll talk more about it. It's moving product between stages of production or to final markets. Now, we tend to think about the final market part. Oh, yeah, we're trucking that thing to Walmart, so we'll be sold. What we forget about is all the movement between stages of production, all this component assembly stuff that is the biggest part of the movement. That is, most movement transport is business to business, not business to consumer. Whatever you may think of FedEx and Amazon delivering books to your doorstep, that is a smaller part of it. Most of it's getting the books to Amazon's warehouse so they can then be delivered to you. Okay? And by the way, in transport goods, the transportation of goods is much bigger in value than the transportation of passengers. Again, when we think of transportation, you and I think of getting on a plane and flying off to see grandma. But most of it is carrying goods, even planes, because FedEx has whole fleets of planes. Okay, the cost of transport, as we know from Alfred Weber, is critical to location, to the movement of stuff, and it's going to be critical to globalization. Falling transport costs are absolutely crucial to the ability to globalize production in all ways. And, we tend to think of distance costs and time costs. Just want to put a third kind of cost there, which is loss. You can't have stuff sitting out in the rain, and you can't run it off a freeway like this truck just did. You lose a lot of goods and value and time. Okay, and then dynamics are very important. We'll come back to that in just a second. in Roman numeral 3 of today's lecture. Okay, storage. Nobody thinks about this except, weirdos like economic geography professors. But storage is a big part of the historic geography and the economic geography of the world, of the modern world. We tend to describe it in terms of factories. They're kind of exciting and look sort of more dramatic. Warehouses are really boring. Now most warehouses are just these big boxes, windowless boxes. You look at them from the air, they just got a big flat roof. If they're exciting, they have some air vents. They're really boring. And they got some trucks parked there, and you go, whoopee. But if you fly into Ontario Airport, you will see tens of millions of square feet of warehouses, just as far as the eye can see. And you're going, what are those things? Well, they're a huge part of the Southern California landscape now, and they're all warehouses. Now, if you take my urban field class, of course, if you go to San Francisco along the waterfront, you see all these old brick warehouses, which are really cool, and now, of course, have interior decorators in them or something. Well, they used to be warehouses right next to the piers, moving and storing the products. Okay, so warehouses are stocks. They hold stocks of things moving from place to place, especially near where you break what's called transshipment breaks between, say, ships and trains, or ships and trucks, or trains and trucks. You get warehouses at those points. Transfer is a very important part of what they do. They don't just stock stuff up, although they do, but they transfer it. They take in stuff, the books that are going from the publishers, and then as the orders come in, then Amazon sends them out to you through FedEx. And it's a two-stage process that goes through giant warehouses. Walmart warehouses, we'll talk about Walmart another day, giant warehouses are the key to Walmart. Cross-docking is the new thing about intermodal shipping and through warehouses where they take, say, a shipment, a whole trainload of containers, put them in the warehouse, and sometimes they'll even take stuff out of the container, repack it for reshipping on trucks to another place. So there's a lot of sorting and packing that goes on in these warehouses too. And then there can even be things like quality control checks, very important because something's coming across the Pacific. You've got to make sure it gets there without having been damaged by water, by loading, by the crane dropped it or something. Who knows? You drop a container, say, oops, pick that up, put it back on the train. At the warehouses where they check that out. So it's actually even part of the extended production process goes on in warehouses. Aren't they exciting? No, guess not. So there are huge workplaces employing literally millions of people working in the United States in warehouses, and tens and hundreds of millions around the world. Well, we'll say tens of millions. I get too carried away in my excitement. That's a really terrible photograph. That one's better. They are major workplaces with big labor forces, and they have a lot of machinery, a lot of capital equipment. And some of it's just, you think, well, they're just shelves. But they've got forklifts, and a lot of them have mechanized, automated things to go to the right place, put the product in, pull it out, pull the box out, bring it down, and get it ready for loading. And some of these automated warehouses are quite amazing. There are single warehouses, They used to be more attached to factories or stores. We'll talk about stores next week. But a lot of them are what are called regional warehouses, very big. And there are warehouse clusters. They've always have been near ports, near railheads. And if you go down around San Francisco Airport, which is what this picture is, you see all those flat buildings there? What the hell's going on there? There are 35,000 people working around the San Francisco Airport. Only about 5,000 work in the airport. What are these people doing? They're working in warehouses because stuff is going in and out. Not only do they have to feed you, remember all those food things, right? Not that they feed you very well anymore, but they are also handling a lot of shipping of electronic components, for example, in and out of the airport. They go by air, not by ship. And the main thing you find in most industrial parks, by the way, is not industry, is not factories, but warehouses. Okay, the scale of warehouses is going up. This is a nice picture of a warehouse outside in Germany, I think this is. These mega warehouses, they're moving farther out from cities, farther away from traditional port locations and so on. They're more and more automated. They're more gigantic. They're farther out. What can I say? So they're a big part. I heard a talk last year at the geographers meeting, somebody calling this logistics sprawl, because these things are just spreading out far from the old cities. Okay, logistics. Logistics is the managing of all this. Now, middlemen, but that's a kind of generic term, right? But those are the people, the companies that handle all this process of shipping, storing, communicating, and getting the stuff from one place to another. And they used to be called merchants or brokers, wholesalers. Some of them still are. McKesson is the biggest corporation still in San Francisco. It's the biggest drug distributing, the biggest wholesaler of drugs in the world. And you've never heard of it because it's not glamorous. But it has this huge building in San Francisco. Okay? It's basically, you could call it a logistics company. I think they call themselves a pharmaceutical wholesaler. And what they may handle all the different functions that go into distribution. Shipping, storing, or they may do part of that. Some of them do part, some of them do all of it. And then they got to make it all work. It all has to connect, it all has to flow. We'll talk more about the flows and all next time. So logistics is managing distribution, which means you've got to, the logistics problem is to move things quickly, to get them where they're supposed to go, keep track of them, not lose them, not damage them, and handle all the information so that you know what's going where and when. So that people can call up, You can call FedEx and find out where your package is, because they track this stuff brilliantly. And then you connect everything geographically. Logistics is so geographical. It's about connecting things and getting everything from one place to another and integrating whole production systems. Who does it? Well, a mix of independent firms and integrated firms. And the independent firms might be a traditional wholesaler like McKesson, or a shipper like Costco, or a logistics specialist like the name I forgot to look up. Sorry about that. And then some of the big manufacturers do their own logistics. Toyota does its own, all the way to the sales people, the local Toyota dealers. Walmart does its own, all the way back. So they don't necessarily rely on third parties. We'll talk more about these guys another day. Now, finally, transport and communications. I want to talk about the geography of these things and then the dynamics of these things. And you can do their whole courses, people do, and journals on transport geography, which you really don't want to know about because it's way more obscure than you ever cared for. But we have a transportation studies center on campus. Does a lot of big-time research, not just on cars, but also on things like logistical movement of goods. So, first of all, we have transport and communication modes, and there's several modes. They're all operating in today's world. Some of them are historic, like barges are really old-fashioned, but boy, they move a lot of coal around, and a lot of corn, and so on. Ships of all kinds, still very big, absolutely crucial to international movement. Trains, still important. Highways, airplanes, pipelines, you probably never think about pipelines. And electrical, well, I won't say electrical lines because they're really about supplying electricity. We'll talk about that another day. Communications, there are all kinds of communication systems. Historically, the mail and the telegraph being primary. Today, of course, much more about internet and all the exotic ways that the internet connects through satellites and cables and microwave stations and so on. But face-to-face is a form of communication, as I insisted on last time, and should not be forgotten. In fact, I just read an article about email. Somebody just did a study, this is in The Economist, of email. You tend to think, well, email must be used mostly for really long-distance stuff. No, turns out we mostly email our buddies who are close. Same with texting. A lot of it's just replacing local mail delivery or a telephone call, which is how you used to do it. Or intercampus mail. We used to have intra-campus mail. This used to be a big thing. Now it's hard to get anything. Intercampus mail, because everything's email. All my work arrives by email. But it's very local. Most of my email is local. Okay, now, those modes have networks. Most of these modal systems move along networks because they require heavy infrastructure. An infrastructure of roads, of pipelines, of telegraph lines and telephone and relay stations. And even satellites, we don't think of them as networks, but they create, the satellites around the Earth create networks, which are not universal. They don't go everywhere. They don't work equally well everywhere. Transatlantic cables, there's a good network, communications network. So here's this is train traffic in the U.S. This is a recent map I got out of The Economist, showing, of course, it's moving along these major rail corridors, which are fixed rail lines. So they don't go everywhere. You don't get very good rail connections in the Intermountain West, for example, if you're away from the main lines. This is pipelines system. Moving gas and oil is very restricted by pipeline.